with good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Two Tokens, and today we're here in Amsterdam with Shermin. And Shermin, thank you for coming all the way from Portugal. And thank you for being here again after 5 years at the beginning of Two Tokens. And today, hopefully certainly not at the end of Two Tokens, but at the next phase of the adoption of tokenization. So welcome.
Thank you for having me again.
Yeah. Yes. A lot has happened, and I'm just in awe of your writing skills. You know, you're going for your third book. That must be so much work.
It is quite a lot of work. It is the third edition of Token Economy, and I underestimated the level of, I thought I would just update the book, but just updating was not good enough. I realized that, we're not in 2018 anymore. Things have changed. People know more, so I have to go deeper. I have to go wider. DeFi in the second edition, as I was writing the second edition, I finished the second edition in May 2020. This was before DeFi summer, you know. This was when I finished writing it, and it came out in June. So DeFi was like a sub-chapter, you know? And now it's a whole book. I decided, because I had to go wider and deeper, I decided that this third edition of Token Economy will come out as a series of 3 books. And it builds on the content of the previous edition, but there is a lot of new content. It goes, a lot of new content and obviously updated content.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, you said, you started with a small chapter on DeFi. And if you look at tokenization, you could argue that tokenization is maybe another word for digitalization.
Yes.
And there's always that DeFi angle, right? That finance angle. And
Web3 is the financial web, right? It is the financial web and it's the governance web.
Yes.
And the first use case was Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is a financial asset, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that we will talk about it today in the presentation also. It's like there are so many different types of tokens still, even 15 years into Bitcoin, you know. People reduce tokenization or the power of blockchain networks to tokenizing assets or digital assets. And yes, we can tokenize assets and property rights, but we can tokenize so many other different rights: voting rights, management rights, information rights, etc., etc. And so it is much more than just digital money. Basically, it's a rights. Web3 or blockchain networks are rights management tools, and tokens are the representation of the certificates that are collectively managed, that where the infrastructure then knows who is allowed to do when and what, and who is allowed to do when and what. Send tokens from A to B, vote for a protocol upgrade, vote for new management, get certain information. We can bake these into these token systems, and it's a governance technology.
It's interesting that you're saying this, because when we started in 2019, and you were there for the kickoff, right? And you published your first book. And back then everybody said, Alex, if you do this roadmap of tokenization, don't use the word crypto, don't use the word Bitcoin, because it's all very difficult to manage and we don't understand it. But it's interesting how your books have always been our baseline for what we are trying to do with Two Tokens. This is basically take people by the hand and help them rethink their business, rethink their business models, and help them in the digitalization. And yes, we have loyalty tokens, we have voting tokens, and absolutely right. But how do you see the adoption now, 5 years, 6 years into it? Are you?
Still super early. It's still the Wild West.
It's still the Wild West.
It's still the Wild West. It's the Wild West is not as wild anymore. It's becoming more structured, but we're still in the Wild West. It's still this gold rush era where people are focusing on going and finding the gold in the rivers, right? And the gold mines and doing the washing thing in the rivers. But it's still people have now understood. So the general public, I'm not talking about people who are deeper in the topic, but the general public still perceives Web3 still not a word. Crypto is limited to not anymore just cryptocurrencies. They're starting to understand, oh, yes, maybe crypto assets. So with BlackRock now, asset tokenization. The focus is still only on tokenizing assets.
Yes, that's the low-hanging fruit.
And I always say it seems to me like it is kind of the first killer application, or
yes.
I once used a few times used the word gateway drug.
Yes. Yeah.
I was criticized by some anti-blockchainers. It's like, and she's using the word drug, but it's a metaphor, but whatever. So I really think that the first, like email was the first use case of kind of the commercialized web that people understood, and then Tim Berners-Lee came and we had the World Wide Web.
Yes.
And you have those YouTube videos from 1994 where people were on TV were trying to explain to each other what the internet is.
I was there, yes.
We were there, right? What is the internet and what is this www? Is it like email? And they're like, no, it's like a digital billboard. People understood email, but they didn't understand the internet. It's like, where does this information come from? But it was the same thing.
Back in those, if you make that comparison, because businesses had just gotten accustomed to using fax, right? Mm-hmm. And then we tell them, no, you don't need fax anymore. We need email. I said, exactly. Who am I going to send an email to?
People were completely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So asset tokens, in my opinion, cryptocurrencies and other crypto assets are like email to the early internet. So the other things we can do with tokens represent digital driver's licenses, any kind of certificate for people, organizations, products along the supply chains of goods or services, access rights tokens, voting tokens, purpose-driven tokens that steer DAOs, because Bitcoin is an asset, yes, it's a cryptocurrency, but Bitcoin is also the fuel of it's the native currency of this distributed internet tribe called the Bitcoin network. It's a digital payment network that is collectively maintained by voluntary participants who get rewarded for their network activities, verifying transactions, adding blocks to the ledger with Bitcoin tokens. This is an economic system.
Yeah, you have to wonder if it's a payment network, but yes, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it started out as a payment network. Yeah. Today, it's going direction general purpose blockchain network, like
we need to keep close enough to the microphone.
Like Ethereum. So, but it's a collectively made digital infrastructure, right? But this collective is not a nation state. It's not a city government. It's like random people over the internet who choose to opt in and be part of the system, just based on these computational rules, which we call the Bitcoin protocol. And so we can do so much more. And these are the purpose-driven tokens I write about in one of the books. Because I think this will be really the game changer. How can we use tokenization among many other technologies to incentivize, create new value streams over the internet and coordinate over the internet?
Yes.
And do much more than just create
Well, one of the questions that I have is, this is a narrative that people in tokenization and in crypto understand in Web3, but that's only 5% of the world. If we're lucky, maybe it's even on 2%. So the other 95% of society don't understand this, right? And
no, they won't. They
won't.
They will understand when the Facebook of crypto comes along.
Exactly. So,
we don't have the Facebook moment for crypto yet.
But the point is that a lot of our laws and regulations today are not capable of supporting decentralized systems like what we. So we do need changes in several civil codes when it comes to property law, for instance. We need changes when it comes to payment tokens. We need change, and even if you look at DAOs, what's coming on right now, and we're way early with DAOs, right? Let's not even get there. But if you were to do that, we would have to make several changes in civil codes. So don't you agree that what we're seeing right now is that there's a little bit of if you can do it the old way, the analog way, it's allowed. But if you start using it in a decentralized way, all of a sudden it's not allowed. So in a way, there's not a level playing field. How do you see this?
Well, it's not a new problem. The Web2.
Yeah.
The Amazons and Ubers and Facebooks, etc., of the world who were trying to provide global digital services, not your bank that is only active nationally or your government online services. Services that are only active nationally don't have the problem of the fact that the internet is global, but regulation is local. So we have balkanized regulation, and if you want to launch a digital service, you have to create a product that, if you want to be legal in all countries, fits the regulatory framework of each country, and you will never be successful doing that. This is why in Web2, the strategy started to be get a lot of VC money, have a huge war chest for litigation when the governments come and give you fines. Do the market penetration and say I'm sorry later, and start to comply later when your service already, because if you start to comply with laws from an old world, you will never be successful creating products for a new world.
Yeah.
This problem of now in Web2, at least lawmakers understood that, okay, how do we regulate this thing? How do we regulate the digital service that where the consumers are everywhere? They're like, okay, so regulation applies to where the server is, or to where the company is incorporated, and tax-wise, we regulate it with the consumer. Mm-hmm. Now the server argument doesn't count anymore in a peer-to-peer network. Our greatest challenge today, and this is not only a technological challenge, but the internet shows it much more. I think the biggest problem we have today is that regulation happens on a national level and on a local level, but the world has become more and more international. Mm-hmm. And this is where I wouldn't want to be a politician nowadays or a regulator. This must be so frustrating, because before we didn't have so much international trade, the technology didn't exist, the transportation didn't exist. This is fairly new. This happened in over the last few hundred years, especially since the industrial era, and especially in the last 40 years since the emergence of the internet, or since the explosion of the World Wide Web, and maybe in the last 30 years. And local and national lawmakers are trying to regulate something, but then in the meantime, we didn't only have the internet and transnational corporations, but we also got rid of many tariff treaties. There were so many export restrictions and import restrictions, and in the 70s and 80s there was so many international treaties that got rid of these bilateral tariffs and enabled free trade. This means that companies today can create a company but employ people somewhere else, evading
taxes,
evading,
compliance.
legal compliance when it comes to how to treat their employees, right? So they tend to go to countries where their employees are not only cheaper, but where compliance for employee safety might be lesser, or social security might be less. The consumer saves money. But the problem is that this creates adverse effects also in the nation states. So you have national regulators who can less and less regulate what they should do, because the operating system of our nation states is outdated. Our operating system is based on the concept of having a constitution and the rule of law and being able to regulate within the boundaries of your nation state.
The tokens do not have no borders.
The internet has no borders.
Yeah.
And since free trade pre-internet already, like there is no borders. When you don't have tariffs, when you base things on free trade, your national operating system, your government, and the lawmakers, they are teethless. And I think this is creating a lot of problems on many sides, not only for people who want to create a token system in Web3 or even in Web2, some internet platform, right? It creates many uncertainties. How am I going to do that? Can I be innovative?
You see in all the use cases that we did, right? So all of the use cases were in real world situations. We did electronic bill of lading in the port. We did tokenization of invoices. We did, but what was the impediment of adoption was not so much the technology. That's the easy part. It was in part, it was legislation, laws, and it was know-how, helping people to rethink how they should approach things. And what I like about your books is that you take this practical approach. So what do you see is what are the low-hanging fruit sectors? Because tokenization and digitalization is going to apply the whole society. Every sector is going to be applied. But what is the low-hanging fruit? Obviously, banking and DeFi, they were the early adopters, right? And that's why we see the tokenization of real-world assets, predominantly right now as the use case. But surely in your view, and I know the answer, but for our listeners, what is the low-hanging fruit in terms of other sectors where we could really make a change and make a difference?
Well, I'm not sure if you mean with low-hanging fruit, easy to implement. If you game changer,
it's never going to be easy to implement. We agree on that.
No, the low-hanging fruit for me, as in low-hanging fruit, is asset tokenization, and we're not even there yet.
No.
This is what is happening now. Stock exchanges, big financial institutions realizing that we can really tokenize every financial product, every real world asset. And this is the lowest hanging fruit. This has the least complexity, because we know assets and securities, different types of assets are already classified as securities, commodities, whatever, and we already so making this creating a new type of digital certificate that is managed by public infrastructure is relatively low-hanging fruit. It's still quite complex. There's still a big trajectory, especially for real-world assets where you need information from the outside world. You need hardware oracles, software oracles to provide you information about the state of the actual asset and who has it in custody and what is happening in the real world, and represent like the state of that asset as a digital certificate, as a tokenized certificates on a global infrastructure. This is the low-hanging fruit when you ask me for low-hanging fruit. Game-changing. And this is necessary because once you do the easier stuff, the low-hanging fruits, everyone will have, more and more people will have Web3 compatible wallets on their mobile phones because they're kind of doing things with these tokenized assets, right? And I think we're getting lost in time here. We have to stop. So, but if you ask me what will impact our socioeconomic systems most are the other use cases that are not low-hanging. not from an economic, because we don't know how to design this. We have to rethink everything because we can do things that were almost infeasible before, at least economically.
Well, the reason I'm asking is here at the law firm of Eversheds, and they're doing a lot in energy. Two Tokens is organizing this with many partners. This workshop is done with the top sector ICT, and so we're looking at certain sectors. And one sector that needs help is the energy sector, because of the energy transition, and because if we're digitizing energy infrastructure, we are there to new business models and new structures. That's what kind of what I was
That's a middle hanging fruit, I would say. Yeah. So it's a very important sector to tokenize. It's a commodity that is the regulation is quite clear. But the intricacies are much more complex. Because when is it money, which regulations do apply? But yeah, the energy sector is a middle hanging fruit, I would say, because energy is an asset that can be tokenized, but it's a real world asset. So there are many legal questions.
If you do the asset tokenization, that is the easy part, right? A solar panel.
But this is already not easy, what I wanted to say. Yeah. And then the even harder part, because it's not a digital asset, it's a physical asset, and you need to create the physical systems and make the techno-legal compatibilities to tokenize these assets. But then, and I think this is what you want to, so now we can say, how can we make energy communities? How can we create new value chains where you don't have a centralized energy production company, but you have decentralized energy production and dissemination, co-ownership, etc. And this is the next step. But the first step has to be, and this is even more complex because of regulation, but often regulation is not the problem, because here in Europe, from what I understand, now you're the energy expert, I'm not, but from my little understanding is that Europe at least already is trying to force the energy providers to decentralize and to become service provider for energy communities. And they are resisting in any way they can.
Because it's not in their interest.
It's not in their interest, or they don't understand that if they become the next Uber or eBay or Amazon for energy provision, they will keep making money.
Yes.
They're just decentralizing the infrastructure. Yeah. They will become, and even though they legally have to in Europe, I'm not seeing that most of them are embracing that technology and doing something.
Shermin, it's also very multidisciplinary, and we should get ready for the workshop today. But the multidisciplinary, play. Give you an example. We were in the DLT sandbox for Europe in the last 12 months. And the question was, if you get an energy token from a solar asset and you want to then use that energy token to pay for beer in your local village, is that energy token considered legal tender?
Yeah.
So there you have energy legislation, you have financial legislation, payment legislation. And so we put that question to the regulators and the central banks of France, Greece, the Netherlands. Those are interesting rabbit holes. And I'm so glad that you're here for the workshop today. And
the legal questions is not my strong
No, but we have some legal people in the workshop today, and that makes it so much fun, because we will look at the value engineering of token systems. We will look at the digital legislation, and of course some of the technology. But one final word for the crowd.
Well, I think when you think in terms of tokens and designing token systems, people try to leapfrog to the wrong questions. They're like, how do I regulate this? Or on which technical infrastructure, or how do I technically do this? But these are the last questions.
Absolutely.
Okay. The first question is, what is the purpose of what you want to do?
Yes.
What are your principles, your internal political principles with which you want to create the systems?
Yes.
Okay. And then the next question is, how should the economic system, what properties, economic properties, do you want to give this token?
Yes.
And then you can go to your lawyers and say, okay, does that make sense? Is that legal in the core countries where I want to launch a system?
Unfortunately, today it's the other way around. They start with the technology and
you don't start to say, this is a security token. This is the wrong way to do it. And the lawyers now today, they know, they are like, what does your token do? Then I can tell you how we classify it. And then it's an iterative process where you work with the lawyers. If you look back
at the Wild West, you said we're in the Wild West, but in 2016 was the Wild West with all the ICOs. Yeah. All those utility tokens, they said were utility tokens in the end, but were they?
No, because they were trying to classify something they hadn't properly defined yet. A token has various properties, right? So you have to define, what does the token do? Does it transform at some point? Because when it transforms, it becomes something else. And you have to be very specific. Then you talk to the lawyers. Then you talk to the tech people. How do you make it legally compliant? How do you make sure that it's privacy preserving enough, you know? And then this is an iterative process, but you always start with the purpose. What do you want to do? How do you want to do it? Like what do you want to create an energy community or a private company? You know, you want kumbaya and all in and democracy, or you want like rent extraction only for the shareholders? Yes. I don't think that's the future, but you have to be very clear what you want to do, and then you take it from there. Then you make it legally compliant, and then lawyers will have an easier time also when you're clear what you want to do from an economic and social perspective.
On that note, thank you for being here, and let's start the workshop.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me.
That was it for today's podcast. Thank you for listening in, and please subscribe so you don't miss out on our upcoming episodes. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find our contact details at www.twotokens.org.